What's up guys? So today we're going to finish putting this reel back together. Still got to put the front rear roller on. Got the drive bolts to put in, and then we've got the drive system to assemble and put back together. But today to get started, just need to get the rollers put on. That way whenever we go to torque the drive bolts, we've got something stable to work with. So I've already put some of this together just to get us going here. But these reels, they come with the standard height of cut arms. You can buy a higher height of cut arm that allows you to get up to 3/4 to 1 inch. So if some of you guys are mowing taller lawns, that may be something you want to do. With the standard height of cut arm, this is designed to go up to 1/2 inch. And so what I've done is I've built some spacers, and I'll show you those here in a little while, for the rear roller, and that allows me to get up to 3/4 inch whenever I mow in the fall and kind of through the winter. I'll mow a little taller because the grass, as it grows fast, and it tends to not wear out as fast if I mow a little higher. So for the front roller, I've got a groove roller here. Toro also calls that a Wiley roller, and it looks like it's just a bunch of different parts kind of mashed together, but really it's all one solid roller. It's aluminum. It's got these grooves built into it. And what that does, it allows the leaf blade to come through and not get rolled over before it gets cut. And so like on putting greens, you know, obviously when you're mowing at a really low putting height like that, it allows the leaf blade to stand up and get cut really clean rather than being folded over with a smooth roller like what you have here on the back. So the smooth roller here on the back is what obviously helps with laying the stripe, and then the traction unit, the whole thing is a roller, so that really lays down a really nice stripe. So to get this in here, we'll just slide it in to how to cut arm on the other side. These have a little notch in them that needs to fit in between this little bracket. A lot of times I'll miss that when I'm not paying attention. And I'm just going to leave these loose for now. It's just to give us some support as we put this together. And then you just want to center up your roller. And these rollers, they actually have bearings and seals inside of them. And so this set bolt here, it's just going to lock the shaft in place, but it actually has nothing to do with the amount of tension or anything on the roller itself. So my rollers still roll really well. So if yours don't roll as well, you may want to check into replacing the bearings. They make bearing and seal kits to replace those, and I believe you can get those from R&R products as well. So I'm just going to set these little set bolts here. So on the rear roller, same deal. You've got some bearings and some seals that are in here. So mine still roll pretty good, so I'm going to leave them the way they are. And I've already installed this bracket here on the back. So on the rear of the roller, it's just a little bracket that the roller sits in. Like I mentioned before, they come with these spacers. And so for low heights of cut, what you do is you put this bracket on here, and that spacer will just sit on top of the side plate if it's not in use. And there's a chart that you follow to determine what height of cut you need to add more spacers to the rear of the roller. And so what I did is I built another one of these spacers. So I put 2 spacers on here underneath this side plate, and that helps give me that 3/4 inch height of cut that I need there in the fall. But today I'm going to set this thing up to go mow the putting green that we have. So I need to get that to a pretty low height of 156. So this washer, or this spacer, is going to go on top today because I don't need it for that cutting height. So there's nothing to torque here. These are nylon lock nuts. So you just tighten those up, center up the roller between the brackets, and it'll all stay in place. So on the right side, you've got the reel bearing lock nut or lock bolt that goes on this side. And as I mentioned in the last video, you've got left-hand thread and right-hand thread. And the easiest way to tell is the direction that the reel is spinning is the thread that it has. So on this side, It's a right-hand thread. So I'm just going to put grease on these threads. You can also use like a anti-seize lubricant on this. Either way, it's just to help lubricate it to keep it from locking up on you, seizing up down the road. So put some grease on that, and this side calls for 120 foot-pounds of torque. So that's quite a bit more than the 20 foot-pounds we were putting on last time on these side plates. So Toro recommends that you put a block of wood, you know, up in between the reel and the bed knife. And I've done that before, but what it does is it gets everything kind of all out of place and things aren't supported as well. So I take a crowbar. You can take a flat pry bar or something. But if you stick it in between here on these blades, right up against the round portion of this where everything's welded, that way you don't warp the blade. That'll help support everything. And also, by using this pry bar, it keeps everything up off the roller, so that way you're not crushing anything against that either. So I've got this set to 120 foot-pounds. And you're going to hear a click on this one when it's set. So over here on the left side, we're going to do the same thing. We'll put the pry bar up in between the blades, up against the round portion where it's welded to give some support. And on this side, you've got the drive bolt. So this is where the reel is driven from. So what you have on this piece is you got a 1/2 inch nut, I guess you'd say, 1/2 inch nut here and a 1 inch nut up on this side. And anytime you're working on the reel or this portion of it, you want to be on the 1 inch side of the nut. You don't want to be torquing on this 1/2 inch nut, or you're going to break this piece off. That 1/2 inch nut is only used for doing a back lap, and I'll show you more on that later. But this is a left-handed thread on this side of the reel. So again, I'm going to put grease on these threads. And this side needs to be torqued at 120 foot-pounds as well, but my torque wrench only goes clockwise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a breakover bar and just get it pretty snug, using about the same amount of pressure I just used on the other side. So again, use the 1 inch socket on this. Give it some support here. So that ought to hold it pretty good. I'm not worried about this side coming apart because it's constantly being driven in the tightening direction. So really what this side being torqued is all about is so that this doesn't break loose whenever you're doing a back lap and spinning it backwards. So on this side, you've got the drive pulley housing. And you can see by looking at the side of this plate, you can see all the corrosion and that salty buildup I was talking about from where it came from. And so what I did is I've actually cleaned this up and taken sandpaper to clean out as much of it as possible. But what I discovered is there's a little rubber O-ring that goes around this outside here. And so I've gone ahead and replaced it because it was pretty wore out, and I believe that that's where a lot of the water was getting in down here around this bearing. And if you remember in that last video, the bearing I showed you that had all that grit noise in it, it was coming from this side, so I think a lot of that got in from over there. And so when I took this apart, I cleaned all this out and pulled this idler bearing out of here so that I could get in here with some sandpaper and clean up the housing and just check these bearings and make sure that they're okay. And they're all good, so I'm just going to put grease in this housing again, just like we did on the side plates before in the last video. Just put a little grease in there. And this bearing slides in really easy. And just press it in like that. So that's your idler pulley in this setup. And the only thing that holds that in place is this little rubber seal. And it's actually pressed up against right here. You can see that mark. That's where it's pressed up against that other housing, so that way it can't come out. So for this side, I'm going to put some grease around that O-ring and inside of this housing opening, just to be sure that it slides in and it doesn't get broke. Metal's cutting it So this will help it slide in a little easier. It'll also help seal it up a little better, keep water out. So we just work this in. And you've got a couple of bolts that go on the side of this. And as before, make sure you use some blue Loctite on these nuts and bolts on this thing. So I'm going to torque these bolts back to 90 inch-pounds, just like we've done on the rest of the chassis. So inside of here you've got 3 different pulleys, and they each have different tooth count on them. And so let's take a look at the Toro's chart, and I'll show you what that's about and how to set that up in here. So in every Toro cutting unit you have a thing known as clip rate, and what that has to do with is the position in which each pulley is positioned on the cutting unit. And that determines the speed in which the reel spins, as well as the speed at which the mower is mowing. And so what you don't want to have is you don't want to have a clip rate that's too high, because it's almost like the blade gets hit twice with the reel before it gets cut, and it causes excessive wear on your turf. And so that results in like brown tips. You'll notice that on your grass, or you'll also see almost like a washboard pattern in your grass, and you'll feel it when you're mowing because your reel will kind of wobble back and forth as it's going across there. And so if we take a look at this chart, you can see that on here I have an 11 blade reel. So we'll look at the left side of this, and to mow the putting green over here I'm going to be setting it up for 156. So the closest to that is going to be 153. And so what you want to have is you've got position A, B, and C on your reel. And so I need to put the 22 tooth pulley, which in my case the 22 is stamped here. It's the silver one. So that needs to go on the reel. And that will just slide over like that. Sometimes you got to use a little bit of a hammer, use a rubber hammer or anything. Just easily tap it on. And then you'll notice in position B, we want to have the 25 tooth, which in this case for me is this red pulley. And then lastly, the drive pulley is going to be the 24 tooth. Now, most of you are not cutting that low. And so what I'll actually do when I'm mowing Bermuda out front at 3/8 or ½ inch or so, I'll set it up for the higher heights. So like on the chart, if you look at height of 190 and above, essentially, if you'll put the pulleys in that orientation, it'll mow a lot better for you. And the reason I bring this up is a lot of times you're buying these units used from golf courses. And so chances are, since these are greens mowers, they're set up for one of these clip rates that are a lot lower height of cut than what you're actually doing on your yard. So maybe something you want to check out just to make sure that you got your clip rate set right, because I've had it happen on the bent grass out here. You'll get that washboard effect, and I've seen it happen in Bermuda. It doesn't happen as often, but it can happen. But a lot of times Bermuda will start to do that if it's mowed too high, and it's meant to be cut more like a fairway height. So just want to point that out to give you something to check out on yours to see what the orientation is of yours. All the pulleys are stamped on one side or the other, how many teeth it has on it. And so, you know, otherwise just count them up and see what you got. And each one of these pulleys has 2 set screws in them. Mine are an 1/8 inch set screw. And when I bought this mower, I had the hardest time getting these off. And so the lesson I learned on that is, I think I would have had better luck if I had filled it up with oil, you know, like penetrating oil or something, and let these set maybe overnight before I started to, you know, work on it with the Allen wrench. Because what I ended up doing is they were seized up so bad that I stripped them out, And so then I had to drill them out, and it's a very hardened steel, and so it just tore up the drill bits. But it took a couple of drill bits to drill out the center of them to get the bottom of the set screw away from that keyway that's inside of here, in order for me to get these pried off. And even with that, I had to use a bearing puller to get these off. So it was quite an ordeal. So I would just suggest just let it soak in oil for a little while and then start to work on them, and I bet you'll have better luck with it. This is another one of those instances where you might need some heat to heat them up to get them loose, but just proceed with caution, because you've got bearings behind this one, you've got bearings in this one, and you've got bearings behind this one. And this is all a pretty thin aluminum plate, so a lot that can go wrong with that, but just take your time, you can get it done. The only thing I tore up was this bearing housing back here, and it was just because I pulled the bearing out incorrectly. So for these set screws, just want to get them real snug. You don't have to over tighten them. They're not going to go anywhere. So each pulley has 2 set screws in it. And so what I tend to do is, you'll notice that one pulley has some walls on each side of it, and that's for the belt, and the other pulleys do not have that. So I just make sure that that pulley that has the walls on it is lined up correctly. And for me, it's just inside. There's the back lap, the 1/2 inch back lapping bolt that's here. Just behind that is a round surface, and that's where I like to line that up to. So these other pulleys, as long as they're near the arms that they rest on, I find that the belt lines up just fine. Here's the drive belt for the drive system here, and this is something that you want to check out and make sure it's not cracked and split. These are real cheap. They're only like $7 or something. You can pick them up from rnrproducts.com, or you can get it from Toro. Either way, just make sure that they're not wore out. Mine's only got about a season on it, so I'm going to go back on with it. You'll notice if you loosen off this belt tensioner bolt here, you can adjust this to get the belt set. So just line it up with the teeth. And that slides on real simple like that. So what you want to have is, you want it to be snug, but you don't want it to be so snug that there's no slack in it. So you want to give it just a little bit of slack there, and just tighten that up, and just double check that's not super tight. You don't want it to be real tight to create a lot of heat, or it'll stretch or break. So that's all there is to set that. Just give the reel a back spin just to make sure the teeth all match up and everything looks good. Lastly is the cover that goes over this pulley housing, and you'll notice that there's a rubber plug down here on the bottom, and that's an access hole so that you can access the bolt to do a back lap. And when I received mine, that rubber plug wasn't on there, and so that's a good place for dirt and grass and water to get in. So I would just make sure you've got that rubber plug on. They're very inexpensive to replace. So this cover just screws on, there's really nothing to it. Just don't want to over tighten it because it'll split the case. So the last piece that goes on here is this counterweight, and it too has a rubber O-ring that needs to go around this outside edge. And so I put grease around the O-ring and all around the inside edge of here to try to keep water and moisture away from the bearing that's underneath there. So this counterweight is what counters the weight of the drive system, and so whenever it's sitting up on the flex unit part of the unit, it'll hang level every time. And this is something I'd like to torque down with 90 inch-pounds as well. So that's it, the reel is finally back together. So before we get this mounted up, I've still got to change some of these bushings that are in the flex part of this deal. And so the way this works is it hangs right here and allows the reel to move left and right. And then those swing arms that are on the cutting unit allow it to move forwards and backwards. So that's where the flex part of this comes in. And so the old ones were kind of rusted up like that. And you can see what a new one looks like. And so what I felt like was happening is this was not very fluid in how it was moving. And so I noticed when I set the reel down, sometimes I'd get some scalp marks. And so I just thought it's time to take it apart and clean it up, because you could see some of the rust on the ends of it. And so all I'm gonna do is just press in. There's 8 of these little bushings that go on here. And then we'll put these bolts back together here. So this is another thing, I put sandpaper in and worked all the rust out of it so they're nice and clean again. So these bolts are intended to go in opposite each other, and I'll show you what I mean here in just a minute, but I'm going to put some silicone spray on these to help them slide a little easier inside of these bushings. You can see I've got these bars on the front, and these will come in from the back on this opposite arm. And on this arm, you've got this notch here, and that notch needs to look up, because that's what receives the arms off of the cutting unit. So in order to get this mounted, you've got to kind of work these back and forth a little bit. Alright, so there's that. So you can see this moves real fluid now. So it allows that reel to move left and right and move the terrain a lot easier. Alright, so we can finally get this mounted back up. You just need to slide the drive shaft into this collar, this receiving collar back here, and then I'd like to press down on this and get these arms set. And you've got to do them one at a time. So what's really cool about this mower is you can see it can tilt forwards and backwards, and it can also tilt left and right real fluid as it goes over the terrain. And so that's why I really was interested in this Flex 2100 over like a Greensmaster 1000, because a Greensmaster 1000 is a set unit. I mean, you can't adjust it anyway. And so, you know, for many of us that are mowing home lawn, it's not perfectly flat. And there's guys out there that have the Greensmaster 1000, you've seen them go out and top dress with a lot of sand, and that's why, because they need it to be flat in order for it to mow smooth and to not give them scalp marks. And so, like many of you, I moved into this home and the yard's not level. The previous owner didn't level it before they put the sod down out front, and I'm going to show you more about that later here in the spring. We're going to try to correct that this year. And so it was important to me to have a mower that could flex and it could go with the terrain here. And so if that's something you're interested in, maybe looking at a mower, the Flex 21 or the Flex 2100 both has the capability to go with the terrain. And I really like this one. I think it has some advancements over the Flex 21. I think it has a lot better adjustments to it. And I've really enjoyed this mower. I think it's a great choice. And so now we got this all back together. On the next one, we're going to do a back lapping, make sure that reel and the bed knife's adjusted properly. And I'll take you guys out and we'll go mow that putting green. But thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you guys in the next one.